Hey, welcome to Integrative Preparedness. I'm Steve Smith. Well, times are getting more and more interesting, and interesting times can be dangerous times. I want to talk a little bit right now about self defense and non firearm weapons. When I um, used to teach my system of martial arts, I designed the system to be all inclusive, from being able to handle the nitwit at the company picnic all the way up to and through firearms, simply because a martial system, as opposed to a martial art, and there's a difference. A martial system should teach the practitioner how to handle all available weapons in response to all available or all potential threats. When we go back to when people think about weapons in the martial arts, they think about the traditional Okinawan weapons. Some think about Chinese weapons, but most, if they think about weapons, they think about the things like the nunchucks and the tanfa and things like that. um, and there were a reason that those things became weapons. Um, I don't know how I'm not sure how deep to go into this, because this could go on for a long time. But a total system of martial arts, Oriental martial arts, includes a number of weapons, and the system of karate or kempo includes all of those weapons that came from the need of an oppressed people to be able to defend themselves against an oppressive people. Okay, the first thing uh, that a conquering country does is make it illegal for those who they've conquered to have weapons. That sounds a little bit familiar, doesn't it? So when the Japanese uh, occupied Okinawa, and most of these weapons that people think of are Okinawan. When they occupied Okinawa, of course, they made it illegal for the Okinawan people to have weapons, so that the samurai and the occupying forces could just come through their village and do whatever they wanted to. And if the samurai wanted to test and see how sharp his sword was, all he had to do was try it on the neck of the next passing peasant and see whether it was still working okay or not. Well, the Okinawan people developed a system of fighting, and which included certain weapons in order to be able to defend themselves against this. And among those weapons, that now the important thing was that the weapons they developed, because they weren't allowed to have swords and such, uh, the the things that they developed into weapons were common everyday tools or parts of tools that then they developed a way of using as weapons. The nunchuck, which almost everybody is familiar with, was the two sticks, joined together with a cord or a chain or whatever, and that was originally a rice flail. That when they brought the rice in, they'd hold one stick in one hand and whip it and use it to shuck the rice in the other. The tanfa, which, if you're familiar with these things, those of you who aren't familiar very much with the old martial weapons might have seen it most recently in the PR-24 police baton, which is the baton with the handle coming off the side. Okay, the tanfa were smaller things like that, developed to be used in pairs, and they were a stick essentially with a handle coming off the side. They were essentially started off as grinder handles, and they developed ways to use those. The bow, which is their long staff, was simply the stick that they put across their shoulders to carry buckets of water or grain or whatever they wanted to carry. The sai, which is a kind of it's a fork like weapon. It's got a main tine that's longer. It's like a trident, two smaller ones. people feel that came from India, and some of these other weapons are also seen in archaeological finds in southern Asia. But that was another agricultural tool that they developed the ability to use as a weapon. So when I started teaching, uh, when I started developing my system and then started teaching it, it was before many of the states had concealed carry. Actually, before most of the states had concealed carry. So even though I included firearms in the system, I also told my people that it was important they be able to defend themselves without firearms, but more than, just fist and feet. Because the world is a place to where the bad guys are bringing everything they can against you, or if you're met with several bad guys, you don't, most folks aren't tough enough to fight off several people, nor do we particularly want to have to try. Uh, is that all right? Okay, we got a wind blowing around here, and it's blowing our front door open and shut. Um, so I showed them how to use different tools, different basic tools, uh, and I'm not necessarily going to show it here, but I'm going to give you the idea from whence you can take it and kind of run with it. And I would show them ways to use basic tools. Um, I always said that I would rather face a guy who didn't know how to use nunchucks than a guy who did know how to use a framing hammer. Okay, that gives you a hint right there. And I'll tell you an interesting story here about nunchucks. One of the things about nunchucks is that, and people stopped carrying them. Back in my day, it was very popular. A lot of the young guys that didn't know any better, that carried nunchucks around because they'd seen the Bruce Lee movie, and they thought it was pretty cool. And so they'd find nunchucks. Well, a lot of the cities just passed ordinances against, or some of the states even, making nunchucks a recognized weapon. Let's see who's delivering something here. Okay, Amazon's delivering something. Yeah, occasionally I have Amazon deliver me something. Uh, so they made the nunchucks a recognized weapon, so it was illegal to have them, and that entirely defeats the purpose of being able to carry a weapon that's not recognized as a weapon, right? Well, anyway, most of the guys didn't know how to use nunchucks. They just carried them around because they thought they were cool. And the funny thing about, I'll tell you a funny story about nunchucks. A good friend of mine, Jim Harrison, was with, he knew Bruce Lee very well. Matter of fact, Lee said that Jim's son Lance was probably the best he'd ever seen with nunchucks. But Lee was famous for his nunchuck work. I think he got it from Dan Santo. I'm not sure. I could be wrong on that. I'm not in that circle. But but Jim was watching Lee work out one day with the nunchucks, getting ready for a movie, I think. And Jim kind of, I don't know. I forget if he made kind of a statement, or like, that wouldn't really work in a real fight. And so Lee was kind of, well, yeah, it would, yeah, it would. Well, then Jim said, well, you're doing this in the air, and it looks great, looks good for the movies and everything, but what if you actually hit something with it? He says, hit that, and they were in a dojo somewhere, and there's a big heavy tie bag hanging there. And he says, go ahead and hit that bag. And I think I've told this story on a previous video, I don't know. But so Lee did, and he did one of his things, and then he popped that bag, and that chuck, Jim said, came bouncing right off and hit Lee smack dab in the forehead, and darn near knocked him out. And that was a lesson. That was a great lesson, many lessons contained in that, one of which is so much of what people think they're adept at, when you apply it against real resistance, they find they're not quite as far along as they thought they were. Okay, it's easy for flash and flash and sparkles, to look good. It's easy for tactically looking things to look good and deadly, but dry practice, air practice, doesn't really show you what would happen against resistance. So anyway, that's kind of the whole thing about the nunchucks, was that we had people practicing those who didn't realize, who had never used them against real resistance. Well, jumping back now to what we might want to talk about, using normal tools as weapons, I would explain to my people and you want to be able to carry your weapons, right, in your car without people saying, "Ooh, look, weapons," right? That's the whole point of being able to be prepared and armed in certain ways without saying, "Ooh, these are a bunch of weapons." Well, I told all my students that they should be handymen. And as a handyman, you need to carry a big toolbox with you all the time. Remember, this was back in the days before there was concealed carry. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because we could be getting back to that day again, and this is something people might want to keep in mind. So if you are a handyman, you need a number of tools, one of which is a good framing hammer. And I don't mean the claw hammer where that claw comes around, so sharp like that. I'm not an expert on hammers. There's a million different kind of hammers, so any hammer expert out there, feel free to contribute here. I don't mean to where the claw's like this. I mean to where it's sticking more out like that, right? So you've got a hammer on one side and essentially a digging tool on the other. Another one of my favorite things, and I'm not going to show how to use these things here. I'll tell you in a minute how to learn, okay? Another of my favorite was what's called a shark saw, and it's based on, it's a saw, maybe I should be farther back, about that long, I guess. It's just got a handle, and then it's got a kind of a blade, a double-edged blade out here. It's based on the old Japanese draw saw, and on one side it's got normal teeth, and on the other side it has finer teeth, and it's meant for being used to draw. It cuts on the draw as opposed to the push. And it's used for close-in work and things like that. It's it's light, it's sharp on both sides, it'll rip something to shreds, and it's easy to work with. Another thing that I always suggest that everybody have plenty of screwdrivers and chisels. You need a good utility knife, okay? You need a good larger knife. Just for your work, just for your handyman work, right? And you need a good knife that you always carry in your pocket because you're a handyman and you might need that knife. A good crowbar, a good pry tool. You need those with you all the time. So all of these things, plus one thing that I always recommended, was about a 6-foot piece of chain with a couple of large nails, some of the big spikes, okay? And of course, the reason that you need this chain was that I'd put a nail in case I wanted to see exactly, something was perpendicular, right? So I'd have this one nail, and I'd slip it through the one link, the end link on one end of the chain, and then I'd put that other big nail down on the other end of the chain, about 6 feet down. Okay, so naturally, if I wanted to make sure that something was hanging straight, that's exactly what I would do. Okay, of course, if I needed to swing that thing around, I guess I could, right? And if I wanted to hold it in the middle of the chain and swing it around like that, I guess I could do that also. Using your imagination, you can come up with a great number of things that we would call environmental weapons. Your world, the world around you is full of weapons. All you have to do to recognize them is start looking around you with that kind of eye. As things, I don't know if this will ever be totally necessary, but there are a great many times, and as a society devolves, it becomes more dangerous. And you're more open to attacks. You're more open to people just wanting to start some bad trouble with you. And there are many times that a gun is not your best option. Okay? If somebody's coming at you and they're just coming at you, and you're in fear for your life. Okay, I'm not going to get into the legal aspects here because that opens up to way too much argument. If someone's coming at you with a deadly weapon, you have a right to defend yourself. Okay, with deadly force to save yourself or another. Uh, but if somebody's just coming at you and you think, oh, this is going to be a real bad day, or you're out with your wife or your husband or your kids or something like that, and somebody's just coming at you with something less than a gun, um, you don't want to use a gun. You're going to find yourself in prison. And maybe you need to be able to have some lower intensity response options for that. Okay, I would suggest you keep these things in mind. I'm probably not going to go into any further detail on these. You don't need me to. You can think about what these things are. If you just want some ideas, just go down to Home Depot and walk up and down the aisle and go, ooh, yeah, that would be good. I probably need an axe for my handyman business, um, and then how you learn to use it. You probably don't, but you may live in an area to where there is a martial arts school run by a guy who actually knows what he's doing in real world combatives. Okay. And the reason I say you probably don't is because the vast majority of martial arts schools have very little to do with real self-defense. It is an art now. It's an activity. Most of them have never been in a real fight, and by that I mean, a fight that was determined by who got, put out, not who got the most points. Um, and so most of them aren't going to be able to. They'll show you all the fancy stuff they can do with their tonfas and their bows and their nunchucks, and that has absolutely no practical application in today's world. I don't care what you see in Bruce Lee movies and Steven Seagal movies and things like that. What he can do with when he breaks a pool cue in half. A stick can be handy if you know how to use it. If you don't know how to use it, they're just going to take it away from you. So find somebody who actually has some knowledge, some background, some experience in violent confrontations, and talk to them. Maybe they'll get together with you and put their heads together and say, okay, well, that sounds like an interesting idea. Let's see what we can come up with on how to develop your handyman skills to be able to apply to defend yourself. Now, a lot of people will just kind of slough this off, and I suggest you don't. We don't know what may be coming our way. We don't know. We know that we have the people coming into power don't want us to have weapons. Well, why doesn't an incoming power want the people to have weapons? Well, because it's going to be an oppressive government, right? They don't want people to have weapons. That puts the good people in in a position of victimhood, because the bad folks are always going to have weapons. You need to be able to arm yourself in a number of different ways, and this is one way that I suggest. So think about it. Think about it to yourself. Try to find somebody who can teach you. Failing that, find an old ghetto cop somewhere that has had his share of fighting with environmental weapons. Or failing that, just get together with some of your friends and go through some realistic scenarios and think about what you might do. And when I say realistic scenarios, I don't mean things that look cool when you're practicing them, because if they look cool, they probably don't work. Okay, a fight is a messy business, and it doesn't. Nobody fights in 4-4 time. It's not like I take a swing and then you take a swing and then I take a swing and then you. It is messy. It is animalistic. It is horrendous. It is fast. It is, I tell people I don't like to fight because it makes you tired. It messes up your hair. It rips your clothes, and that's if you win, because a fight is is really an animalistic endeavor. Anyway, I suggest you take this. I kind of made light of some of this, but I suggest you take it to heart and think about those other ways that if you find that you're unable to carry a gun, this also applies. I should have put in this earlier. It applies to when you're in those situations that you might not be able to carry a gun. Okay. And hopefully you'll be carrying a knife or two. And if you can't carry a knife, hopefully you're carrying a steel pen or any number of things. And I'll leave that to your imagination. I don't think I'll get into any further on that, but let you go with that. It is the time to start thinking about alternatives to what may happen. Don't hide in that head in the sand dismissiveness about it couldn't happen. We're seeing things that a lot of people said would never happen again, and it looks like it's fixing to. So you all have a good day. Remember that we prepare well today in order to live well tomorrow. And preparing yourself to be able to defend yourself is right up there at the top of the chain. Okay. You all have a good day. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.